In 1998, college football introduced the Bowl Championship Series, otherwise known as the BCS. And since then, it's been a river of controversy. Mainly because what they initially did is they taken the human element out of voting for who ends up in the national championship. Going into next season, when we add the +1 game, which is the 14 playoff, we're leaving the Bowl Championship Series behind. Now, before we get into the playoffs, we got to say to ourselves exactly, what did the BCS do? Well, the job of the BCS was to do one thing, and that was to statistically place the number 1 and number 2 teams in the national championship. It didn't matter who was 3 and beyond. All that mattered is who was number 1 and who was number 2. And it basically statistically fought the argument that we as college football fans have been fighting since the Bowl Coalition and the Bowl Alliance, which is, well, who is your team played? And who is your team's opponents played? And your team's opponents, and so on. It also factored in the way you beat a team. For instance, Florida, they played, number 12 Auburn, and they ran up the score. They ran them off the field. They ran up the score 30 points. So they really, that shows how good Florida is, because look how they beat the number 12 team. Well, Arizona State, they beat the number 8 Nebraska team by 4 points. So it doesn't really matter. Arizona State's better than Florida. So you had those arguments, and nothing ever got solved, because through the Bowl Alliance and the Bowl Coalition, it was basically the same thing over and over again. The best in the Pac-10 faced the best in the Big Ten, and everyone else sort of kind of weeded themselves out or whatever. So once the BCS was introduced, statistically, it started putting the best teams in line to play for the national championship. The problem was you had especially you had the Big Ten and the Pac-10 honks that were seriously aggravated by this, because guess what? Statistically, your teams didn't deserve to be there based on the strength of their schedule. And again, this was prior to the Big Ten and the Pac-10 having the championships, having the conference championships. So it was an uphill fight for them. They could have an undefeated or a 1-loss Michigan or an undefeated and 1-loss UCLA, and they'd get left out over a team like, let's say Florida State or Tennessee, Florida, Nebraska. Those are the teams that were having the most success during the initiation of the BCS. So little by little, the human element fought, the human element won. They started first they were taking out strength of schedule. Strength of schedule shouldn't matter. Well, actually, first they took out the style points of your wins. Style, it doesn't matter how many points, a number 5 team beats a number 12 team. That doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter, Then they started taking out the relevance of strength of schedule. Well, we can't help we can't help the fact that we play in the Big Ten. We can't help the fact that we play in Conference USA. That shouldn't go against us. Yeah, well, yeah, it should. Life's unfair. It happens. Okay, so here we are in 2013, and we got a situation like Ohio State, and this is a very tough situation because Ohio State is living on the fact that they haven't lost in 2 seasons. Okay, they deserve the right to be there. The problem is that nobody has any faith in the Big Ten anymore. The Big Ten has lost all faith, or the fans lost all faith in the Big Ten, because I think what it came down to is when Ohio State played Florida in the national championship and just got run by Florida, Ohio State lost a lot of credibility in that game, and as a program, suddenly people were looking at Ohio State and saying, "Wow, you just can't." No matter how good you look during the year, no matter how good you look against Michigan State. No matter how good you look against Purdue, no matter how good you look against Illinois, it doesn't matter. Because the minute you face the best in the SEC, you get run. So right then and there, Ohio State lost a lot of credibility. I think the nail in the coffin for the Big Ten was, and let's face it, the leaders and legends labels didn't help them. Okay, if you ask me, that's when it all went to hell for the Big Ten. But I think what actually killed it what killed the trust the Big Ten had with the fans and the voters was when Michigan played Alabama last year to open the season. Michigan was considered to be a preseason, a darling of the preseason voters because they had Denard Robinson coming back. They had a solid defense coming back. They were returning most of their offensive line, and they had a lot of playmakers surrounding Denard Robinson. And Denard Robinson was going to be the guy that Johnny Manziel ended up being. And people were basically clamoring for that game because they're not going to be able to hide this time. They're going to face a very tough Michigan team. Well, guess what happened? Michigan got run. Not only did Michigan get run in that game, but you saw that the Big Ten lost tons of credibility with that loss. And if you remember the year before, it was the same thing that happened with the Pac-12. Oregon, they got to, Oregon a year or just several months out from, barely losing to Auburn in the national championship. They get they start off the season playing against LSU, and they just got completely run by LSU. So you start developing this sort of reputation for the SEC as they are the gold standard, because the best SEC teams seems that they're always going to be the best Pac-12 and Big Ten teams. So you got Ohio State right now. They're undefeated on the outside looking in. And this past weekend, giving up 35 points to Illinois didn't do them any favors. So how does Ohio State win this battle? Well, it's simple. You're just going to have to wait till next year. Or hope that Florida State and or Alabama lose out. Lose a game. They stumble. And I don't see it happen. Well, I definitely don't see it happening for Florida State. I do see it possibly happen for Alabama. So where does this leave Ohio State? Well, it leaves them on the outside looking in with a crybaby for a coach. A crybaby who didn't have a problem with the BCS when he was coaching for Florida. But suddenly now has a problem with it. Yeah, it's flawed. Guess what, Urban? It's not flawed. It's not flawed because it does what it's supposed to do. It puts the two best teams in position to play for a national championship. That's what the BCS was meant to be there for, and that's what it was supposed to do, and that's what it's done. Now we go into next season. We go into next season with the 4-team playoff, or the +1, however you want to call it. Now, this is where the BCS would actually work better. Okay, because right now what they're going to do is they're making a huge mistake by bringing in a committee of humans that are going to vote based on whatever they feel the right 4 teams. Basically, they're going to vote on who they feel the right 4 teams for this playoff is. Now, this is where it's going to get tricky because I think you're going to see a lot of problems going into this situation. Because I look at who they're picking to be on this committee, and first and foremost, and this is my biggest problem with this whole committee, is Condoleezza Rice, by far the most highest profile member of the committee. For those of you that don't know, Condoleezza Rice, she's from Alabama, but she was educated at Stanford. She's a political animal. You don't become the 66th Secretary of State by not being a political animal. She gets it. She knows how to play politics. And that's very dangerous, especially for a committee that selects who the best 4 college football teams are. Let me explain why. Condoleezza Rice comes from a situation, again, she was the Secretary of State under George W. Bush. She comes from a world where it doesn't matter what the citizens think because they don't know what's good for them. That's their attitude. The people, the status quo, the opinion of the status quo doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the American people will vote again. They will vote in favor of abortion. It doesn't matter. They may vote for it, but they don't know. They don't know what's good for them. We do. Okay? It doesn't matter that the American people would vote for the legalization of marijuana. They don't care. They don't care that they would vote for that because the American people, they don't know what's good for them. They think they know, but they don't know what we know. We know what's best for them. How is that going to play out as a voter for which teams are going to go into this 4-team playoff? Could you imagine if it was going on right now? You got Alabama, you got Florida State, you got Baylor, and you've got Ohio State as the top 4 teams all undefeated, let's just say, going into the bowl season. You could see somebody like Condoleezza Rice saying, wow, well, Ohio State, even though they're undefeated, Stanford should still get in there. And I'm not saying that Condoleezza Rice would pick Stanford strictly because she's from Stanford. Let me change that. Let's just say, well, Ohio State, they really haven't played anybody, so let's go ahead and put Oregon in there, a one-loss Oregon, because that's what's best for what everybody wants to see. Everyone may want to see Ohio State get into the 14 playoff, but they don't know. We know best, and Oregon is the better team for that. This is where the problem lies with the human element, because now you're taking away a foolproof statistics tool, which is the BCS. People can rip on computers all they want. Computers they're never wrong. And when they're wrong, it's because a human programmed them wrong. Computers get it right. If they didn't, why do we need calculators? Do you use a calculator every day because 9 times out of 10 it gets it right? You use a calculator to make sure that what you did was right. And most of the time you find out you were wrong. Okay, calculators are there because they're computers. They don't get it wrong. When you do your taxes on your computer, you use your computer because your computer doesn't mess up. When you find out that, your computer screwed up, it wasn't because the computer didn't do its job. It's because you didn't do yours. And that was the whole reason of the BCS. They needed a foolproof plan that took out all the emotion. Guess what? Say goodbye to that. Say goodbye to the foolproof plan. And say hello to the human voters. The ones that actually said, well, I know that Stanford, they stumbled against Utah, but they're one of the best teams in the nation. They deserve to be ranked in the top 5. Yeah, well, we saw that. We saw what happened when they played an SC team, who couldn't tackle and couldn't cover. And yet they still lost. Yeah, so much for the human element there. How about all the teams that were like, well, Oregon can play with anybody in the nation. Yeah, except for Stanford. Except for a team that can run the ball. I mean, how bad is Oregon's run defense? Nobody takes that into consideration. What's one thing that both Florida State and Alabama do very well? That's run the ball. Okay? they've got both teams have several running backs that run the ball very well. Oregon couldn't even stop Stanford. I mean, they were lining 8 or 9 guys in the box on 3rd and short, and they knew what was coming. They stacked it. They stacked the 2 gap. They knew it was going right through the 2 gap, and they stacked it. Stanford still got 5 yards out of it. But this is what the humans think. Yeah, Oregon can play with anybody. Yeah, well, obviously not. And here we are. Oregon's back in the top 5 with a very solid chance to get in the national championship. Let's just say this. Florida State's really the only one that has a foolproof plan of making it to Pasadena. Okay? Idaho and Florida, and then probably Duke. It doesn't get any easier than that to get to the national championship. But Alabama, they got to play Auburn. That's gonna hurt them, and then they got to play the SEC championship. They could lose either one of those games. Ohio State, well, they still got to play. They got to play Michigan State. Most likely, they're gonna have to play Michigan State. And they could very well lose that game. Michigan State plays great defense. And quite possibly, Michigan State's the most underrated team in the polls. Baylor, they still got to play Oklahoma State. They could very well lose that game. Guess what? If those 3 teams lose, Oregon's back in the national championship. They got to play Florida State. So, yeah, the human element hurts you. It hurts. They can't take out emotion. Case in point, let's go back to the 2003 BCS championship. Do we remember that? Do you guys remember who played in that championship? That was a huge, problem that was kind of unfairly blamed on the BCS. Oklahoma and LSU. They ended up in the national championship. And I don't know if people remember that, but LSU ended up winning the game. Southern Cal was on the outside looking in. And they ended up splitting the national championships, giving one to, the BCS, which is the one that mattered, went to LSU, and the AP went to Southern Cal. But the problem was, why didn't we see Southern California, USC, face LSU? Well, it's simple. What a lot of people don't talk about is something like 7 or 8 voters, pollsters, gave Miami of Ohio the number 1 spot. Yeah, they had Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback that year. That was his junior year, right before he left and got drafted to Pittsburgh. But they gave Miami of Ohio the number 1 spot in their polls. Evidently, that's the reason SC didn't end up in the national championship. Those 7 votes. So you're going to tell me that we're going to put all our faith into the human element going into this playoff system? I got news for you. It's going to be more problems than it's worth. We need the BCS. We need some kind of computerized system to put the top 4 teams in there. Humans cannot be unbiased. And I'm not blaming everybody else. I'm just as flawed as anybody. I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan. I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan since I was a kid. I love the Cowboys, no matter how bad they are. No matter how egotistical and damaging their owner is, I will always stand by the Cowboys. I beat the insiders every week. Go up against Inside the NFL guys on Showtime. I make my picks. Every week I pick Dallas. I can't not pick Dallas. I knew they were going to lose to New Orleans. I knew they were going to lose to Denver. I picked them anyway. That's the human element. That's what's wrong with this. I'm a Dodger fan. I'm going to pick the Dodgers. That's just how I roll. That's the human element. That's my flaw. That's what we're going into. We're going into a situation where the humans are going to actually determine what teams get in. So you're going to see a team that doesn't deserve to be there get in. That's going to happen. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen. It's a matter of when it happens. A UCF team, a Fresno State. Well, Fresno State shouldn't be penalized because the conference they play in and because the teams they play against. Yeah, they should. Absolutely. Just like Ohio State. Ohio State's not just getting penalized because of the conference they play in. Ohio State's really getting penalized this week because they gave up 35 points to Illinois. Illinois is, let's be honest, Illinois is not necessarily the gold standard I wouldn't necessarily say that Illinois is the gold standard of the Big Ten. Okay? You're talking about you're talking about a team that put up 24 points against Washington, 19 points against Nebraska. They only put up 3 points against Michigan State. And yet they hung 35 on Ohio State. So yeah, Ohio State's got to take it on the chin for that. Can Ohio State's offense play with anybody in the nation? That's what everybody's saying. They've got just as good of an offense as anybody in the nation. I disagree with that. I don't think they do. I think they've got a darn good offense. But defense wins championships. I'm sorry. And these people who sit there and, the Jesse Palmers of the world who say the best defense is a good offense. No, You're wrong about that. Once again, Jesse, you got it backwards. Just like when you were sitting there trying to sell Stanford after they beat Oregon. Stanford, when they play when Stanford plays their Stanford football, they can beat any team in the nation. No, they can't. They just can't. They can't beat Utah. They can't beat USC. What's Stanford football? Running the ball, 100 times a game? Yeah, okay, great. They can run the ball. Jesse Palmer gets it wrong. Just like he gets it wrong when he says, well, the best defense is a good offense. No, you got that backwards. The best offense is a good defense. Defense can score points. Defense has the ability to score points. But in the end, if you can't score, you can't win. And if you're facing a good defense, you're in trouble. That's where Ohio State. We're going to see when they, if and when they do play Michigan State. We will see what happens to Ohio State in that game, because they're going to play a defense that can actually stifle them. They're going to play a tough defense. You know, we're going to see what happens with that. One game that sort of stands out to me is last week's Michigan State versus Nebraska. Michigan State put up 41 points on Nebraska. Now, I'm not trying to sit here and sell that, well, you know, Nebraska has the best defense, but you know, they're one of the better teams in the Big Ten. You know, you look at Ohio State. Look at their schedule so far this year. Buffalo, they've put 40 points. Wisconsin, they put up 31. Northwestern, they put up 40. They put up 63 on Penn State. They put up 56 on Purdue. They put up 60 on Illinois. Yeah, that's great. You know, but here's what I'm looking at. I look at Cal putting up 34 points on them. You know, I look at Buffalo. Buffalo is a team that Buffalo put up 20 points on them. Well, that's not a lot, but it's Buffalo. They're not supposed to put up 20 points on you. You know, Northwestern put up 30. Yeah, that's okay. Northwestern was supposed to be a lot better than they are, but they didn't really materialize. But Illinois, 35 points. They put up 35 points on you. Are you kidding me? How are people looking at that and not? How are Ohio State fans not looking at that and feeling alarmed? How do they look at giving up 35 points to a 3-win Illinois team and not saying, "Wow, that's a problem"? You know, we may have an issue here. Look, I'm a Florida State guy. I can't wait for them to be in the national championship. I want them in the national championship. I want them to play Alabama. I don't want them to play anybody else. I don't want them to play Ohio State. Beating Ohio State's not going to do anything for me. Beating Alabama, that's going to say something. Can they beat Alabama? I don't know. I don't think so. I love Florida State. I'm a diehard Florida State guy. But I don't think they can beat Alabama. I don't think they have the discipline. You know, Bama doesn't make mistakes. They don't make the mental mistakes. You still see Florida State. One of the things that have hindered, one of the problems that's hindered Florida State every year is those costly penalties. When I say those costly penalties, I'm talking about, you know, holding calls on 2nd and 3rd down. I'm talking about pass interference calls or late hits on 3rd and long. You know, that's what I'm talking about. Do I think Florida State can beat Alabama? Yeah, I think they match up with them. I think that they have just as where Alabama seems to have the advantage every year is the athletes they have. They have more guys on their team that's going to play on Sundays than their opponents have. Florida State, guess what? They got a lot of guys that are going to be playing on Sundays. A lot of guys. So that would be a very good matchup. If I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet on Florida State, but my heart would. You know, I'm always going to back my Florida State team, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they're better than they are. I'm not a Pac-12 guy. I'm not a Big Ten guy. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, you know, Stanford lost a couple of games, but those were 2 tough teams. Look, this ain't professional wrestling. And where am I going with that? It's simple. In professional wrestling, when you're cutting a promo, you don't sit there and say that your opponent sucks. You don't sit there and say that your opponent's a terrible wrestler. Why don't you do that? Because if you win, then it's like, what's the big deal? You beat a guy that sucks. You said so yourself. If you lose, then it's like, wow, how bad are you? You lost to a guy that sucks. You said so yourself. You know, I don't play that game. That's the game you see in the Pac-12. That's the game you see in the Big Ten. They got to prop up Illinois. Illinois is the best 3-win team in the nation. There shouldn't be any shock about that. They're a tough 3-win team. They're tough. You know? Yeah, they are. I mean, you can't blame them for their losses. They lost to Washington. They lost to Nebraska. They lost to Michigan State, Penn State. You know, that's a tough 3-win team. Don't be fooled by their record. They're a lot better than their record illustrates. Yeah, that's how you play that game. So, in the end, what are we left with? Well, what we're left with is a flawed system. We're going to take out an exact system and replace it with a flawed system going into next year. Good luck, people. Next year, let the problems begin.